So once again, good morning. My name is Marcela Vargas. I am a grant manager in the Atlanta region, and I've been with HUD for about almost going 4 years. Always with the Office of Disaster Recovery now. This just sounds wonderful. And then this morning, we're gonna cover like all about compliance, and it sounds boring, but it's not. It's a really exciting topic, believe me. We'll try to make it exciting. So we're just gonna cover a few items, and then before I keep going, we just let my partners introduce themselves, and so we take it, we'll then continue with the presentation. So welcome, and thank you again.
Morning. Can everybody hear me? I don't know if this one's on. Scott Prouse, grant manager with the San Francisco office.
Good morning. I'm Chad Forsyth, financial analyst out of Fort Worth, Texas, region 6 and 7. Good morning.
Great. And then after those nice pictures, so what are the objectives of this session? You guys have heard a lot of items throughout the days now with different, cross-cutting requirements, main requirements about the CDBG. So this session is pretty much like what after all these items that if you go through your process, you are really into the cycle of your grant, you're already running your programs, these are really moving in the right direction as we always hope. We're going to ensure that we'll explain you what is important for us to do an actual monitoring review. Like what is it about and how we ensure that we assess the correct items based on a risk assessment that it always happens on once a year. We also want you to understand how do you prepare for those visits and how we team HUD come to you and what's, how is the whole dynamic in this process of the review. Of course, we want to ensure that what are those tools that we use and why we use it and what is the reason. Mainly, when we do these reviews is because we want like the programs or projects that you work on, there's never perfection to it. We just would never get to that point. And we're just there to open up those little sections where like, oh, maybe we can do better here. Maybe we can do better in this section right now. So it's having the conversations on how can you improve your program for the better of the community. Because at the end, for you guys, for the team, it's about the communities that getting back to their homes where they need to be back into a normal life after this, the trauma of a disaster. So we're gonna cover, of course, the overview of the actual review, how to assess the risk, what to monitor, what to look for. Of course, preparing for the visit when you go and see us beautiful faces and then having the conversations. And of course, the main thing that we're gonna really cover is that what are the most common findings? What do we see in the field that perhaps you guys need to know about it and then prepare for it? And what are the actual sanctions? And then we're gonna just wrap it up with questions and answers. Let's hope they're just easy, okay? Just be nice to us. Okay, so let's get going with the actual overview. We just mainly want to ensure that that you guys are really, and we all are, because HUD is always, everybody's looking after us. Disaster recovery has become one of those programs programs funding that has, is unfortunately just disasters after disasters that we've talked about is back to back. And it's something sad that I actually tell my daughter and my husband, it's a lot of work, but not because it's something that we want to see every day, right? But it's now we're here, and then just let's help you get through the actual recovery process. So we want to ensure that you understand that what are those compliance requirements, what are those SHUs and regulations that you have to ensure that you remain in compliance, is still making sure that you bring in all the funding to the actual the right people. We're going to talk about how to prevent fraud, waste, and abuse, early detection of any type of inefficiencies, anything that it is better like review it and catch it at the beginning and not just wait until the very end when we're like trying to close out a program or a project and it's like, what, all this is bad, all this is wrong. So that's why your relationship with the HUD team, grant managers, everyone that is involved, has to be there every day on a daily basis. It's just, that's the only way that we're going to really make sure that the front end is going to be probably more work, but the back end is like, okay, we got this, it's closing. There's this heavy lift after 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years. It's like, we don't remember what happened the year one. So this is the time. Of course, you want to integrate, the monitoring reviews, make sure that you guys review the exhibits, make sure that we look into those details to help educate, the continuous improvement. And of course, we're going to identify like best practices. That is always one of those becoming a most common conversations with our grantees. What are the best practices across the nation? What have you seen on the West? What have you seen on the Pacific side? Like, how can we make it different? How can we improve this? Yes, all the examples would not fit you as a grantee, but it's also a good example. How can you maybe tweak it and make it better? So that's why we actually review. That's why the whole intention is always good. It's not bad. Like, oh, we're going to review this. Oh, here we go. Do I have to prepare for this? Yes, you're going to prepare for this, but we're going to be there. We're going to be along to you. We're going to really kind of go through the process with you. So who does HUD monitor? Who does? We all pretty much is all, the HUD team, you guys, and we have different levels of reviews. Of course, we have the high risk grantees that are like, not because you're high risk, but you also have a really large amount of money for disaster recovery. In our cases, we call high risk of over 500 million as a high risk. And all the headquarters grantees, most of our grantees are headquarters managed. Then we also have the field health grantees. We have the offices here that also manage local governments and some of those disaster recovery, smaller amounts, we'll say, with disaster recovery funding. So each field office will do the review based on the risk assessment. And then the same thing we do at the headquarters level. We have a review assessment. We do have an assessment that happens once a year through some specific guidance that I know Chad will cover in a minute. So that's something that we're going to be looking at as well. So who we should be like doing these reviews, like who is involved in this process? So anybody that has CDBG-DR funding, pretty much. If you're talking about subrecipients, subgrantees, contractors, and of course, as the main recipient, then you're going to be kind of the first person to kind of lead by example, right? We're going to go to you, and then if you have any subrecipients, you go down to the subrecipients, and so on until we can make sure that we close the cycle, making sure that everybody that has CDBG-DR funding is, it's really following the requirements and remaining compliance, because that's the goal at the end of the day. And I completely understand trying to keep that balance between compliance and getting the funding out there. It's not an easy task, but once again, that's what we're here for. So just keep in mind, there's 5 items that we always look for something when you have a really effective review, like when you go down to your subrecipient, subgrantee, or the other agency that you're working working with, like, that partner, MOUs or any other body that you're working with the CDBG-DR funding. Of course, make sure you consider a risk assessment. You need to go through those criteria, those lists that you're looking at. What am I reviewing? Why is this happening? Then how often are you going to do it? You have to have a process in place. And okay, I'm going to do this once a year, twice a year, 3 times based on the risk assessment. You're going to look for more details. You have to really go in very specific, very accurate. Just don't, if you're going to do a review, make sure that where you're looking at is in detail, and you're just making sure that everything is it's under, according to the requirements. Of course, document, and document. You just have to have the evidence to support and demonstrate that you are following your requirements. And I remember back in the day, I used to be a grantee as well. And I do recall saying all this to my subrecipients. And they're like, what is the best way to do this? Just document everything. And someone came to me, Marcela, you know me forever. I did this. I promised you I did this. And she promised me she was going to do that. I was like, yeah, I get it. I understand. But show me the money. What is the paperwork for you to do it, right? So it was interesting having those nice conversations. You really have a great relationship with your subrecipient, but at the end of the day, it's not just us. We're looking for those compliance. We have OIG, it's around the table. So there's more, and they're going to be looking into it. Okay, so just they're going to be that body relationship, but at the end, it's always everything in paper. And of course, you have to find a way to, have a method to track everything that you do. Whether it's, a system of record in the software mode or paper mode, we do not ask for, we just don't really tell you what would be the best way, as long as it works for you and as long as you have everything in place. So I'm done for now, and I will pass it on to Chad.
So Marcella, let's talk risky business. How to assess risk. So the next couple slides, I'm just talk for a few minutes and give you just a snippet of what HUD looks at in preparation to prepare for risk, which drives our overall monitoring strategy for the entire year. But a quick shout out to my internal auditors in the room and online. You've got a tough job, and a lot of you are doing some really great work. If you haven't had an opportunity to build your own risk in-house, leave here with this knowledge, you can do the same thing. So a few highlights here for risk assessment factors. Essentially, we do this multiple times a year. We have our annual risk assessment. We also do pre-award risk prior to full obligation to grantees. So quite thorough. The elements are, it's a very similar process, but here are 5 that we're going to touch on. Overall grant management, financial management, services, which we refer to as complexity of the programs, satisfaction or dissatisfaction, citizen complaints is on here, whoops, and physical. So imagine each of these factors or elements having a series of questions behind them. We spend quite a bit of time reviewing these questions both annually and before obligation to perform our pre-award risk. You can apply the same thing back home to yourselves for staff that you're working with when you're reviewing DR expenditures, as well as preparing to design your risk for subrecipients and even contractors, right? So there's a maximum score, as you can see in the column there, assigned to each factor, management, financial services, and so on. This is just a hypothetical. So don't take these numericals literally. Obviously, they total 100. The HUD reviewer or the reviewer, which could be you if you're preparing to design your risk and your strategy for subrecipients, you're going to complete that series of questions I talked about. And I'm going to give it a couple examples here in a moment. Once we wrap up with the points assigned, you'll assign some points. HUD tends to use high, medium, and low, right? You don't need to overcomplicate this. High, medium, and low, have some questions. Talk with your staff about how to mitigate future risks. Talk through about how you could mitigate those risks and how that works into your criteria for your own risk design, just as we do. So once you've assigned a high, medium, or low, each of those have a numerical value, and those get assigned by both my colleagues here, the CPD specialists, and I'll use this moment to give a shout out to the financial analysts in the room. There are now 6 of us. Would you like to say hello? Good morning, financial analysts for ODR. Oh, okay, there they are. They're waking up. Good deal. Okay, so when that's done, you now have points assigned. You can see your maximum score there. And points assigned. I was going to give a couple quick examples on financial because that's what I do as your financial analyst. So if you're thinking through questions and you're trying to design this in-house, okay, so for financial, some of you are working with millions of dollars. It's you're in a high-risk environment. You're outlaying a lot of requirements. So for financial, for example, I'll give 2 quick examples of questions that we utilize. Under 2 CFR 200 subpart F, audit requirements. If you are expending more than $750,000 in federal funds, you are subject to submission to the Federal Audit Clearinghouse, both for yourself and your subrecipients, right? So if you're a grantee that's outlaying millions of dollars in DR funding, not only are you obligated to report to the Federal Audit Clearinghouse, the game changes a bit. So are your subrecipients. That kind of adds a layer, right? Because not only are you getting that done in-house, you got to make sure your subrecipients are doing that as well. So you need to review Federal Audit Clearinghouse submissions for timeliness to ensure that you're satisfying that. When HUD is on site, we will ask for a tracking log. We will also sample dates from the Federal Audit Clearinghouse. If you're less familiar, the FAC Federal Audit Clearinghouse is open to the public. You could Google it right now. You could pull up information by looking up entities for submissions. So there's one example for financial that may equate to a score here. If your single audit yields finding, heaven help you, it's okay. You've got a corrective action in place, but perhaps that puts you in a medium category because you have a couple findings coming out of your single audit there. Another example I wanted to give for financial is the financial certification process. If you're going through that now, we're with you. You're going to get through it. It is become a more streamlined process the last couple of years. We got that document down from 50 pages down to about 20. We try to do it in 1 or 2 review steps. And hopefully in 1 or 2 review steps with your financial analyst and your CPD specialist, we can move you through the process. But if you are setting up shop and hiring staff, perhaps you don't have a diligent CFO or a senior comptroller or a dedicated financial staff member. Perhaps your financial capacity is low. That equates to a higher risk. If it took HUD 3 review attempts and feedback on your policies, well, your risk might be a little higher. If that makes sense. So we're going to continue with the hypotheticals to see how that outlays into rank. As you can see, the community of Wells. And we love all our children the same, whether you're high risk or you're low risk. We speak to all of you in our memo annually that Tennille Parker signs that gives you a quick snapshot of our assessment and where people fall in rank, what agencies fall within ranks. But here you can see Wells yielded a higher risk ranking due to their score there, which is first, and Lufkin, which is an interesting grantee name, ranks number 2. So you can do this to develop your own monitoring schedule. We release this typically at the start of our calendar year, just after the holidays. We are all, as a team, there's almost 70 of us across ODR working on the monitoring schedule, which dictates our whole year. So this is an opportunity for grantees to build this in-house. If you don't have it, it is our expectation that internal auditors and ODR staff are all working together to monitor funds and have risk-driven approaches to their strategies. I'm going to turn it over to Scott.
All right. Good morning, everyone. So we know who gets monitored, how often they get monitored. So what are we actually going to look at when we get there? This segues perfectly from what Chad was talking about with risk analysis. And what we use that risk analysis for is to inform the focus of what we're going to look at, who we're going to look at, how often, the different programs that we're going to see. You could see in some of those risk factors that we look at the complexity of your programs and how much funding that you have, and a lot of different factors that go into what we're actually going to see. We can, as CPD specialists and financial analysts, we can look in DRGR and we can see a whole lot of different things that you're doing. We know a lot of things before we even show up, right? We can see what programs you have, how much money you've spent, what the different outcomes that you've already accomplished are. But what we want to see when we actually get on site and start to look into your activity files is that story to be told. How did you make the decisions as far as what programs you were going to do and how you got there? You're going to probably hear a few times, if you haven't already in these sessions, a couple of the main things that we're looking for, or the activities eligible. Do they meet a national objective, and do they tie back to the disaster? The 3 very, very important things, especially here with CDBG-DR. There's a lot of other things that you'll see on this list too. Sometimes in the risk analysis, we focus on specific cross-cutting actions like environmental or URA, and we may bring one of our other partners that's a subject matter expert out to do the monitoring as well. we're going to let you know that before we come out. So for those that have seen one of the HUD I'm a coming notification letters, you see that we always let you know that the test is coming, and then we give you all the questions for the test. And I think that's where we're going next. If I can figure out how to use this thing. So this is the CPD Monitoring Handbook, and this is a link that's you'll have in the materials. Always recommend to grantees, go into the CPD Monitoring Handbook. This is the test. We're giving you all of the questions up front. This is not the only thing that we might ask. The exhibits are just a tool that we use to evaluate your programs. You can see here the way this is set up with overall management. Actually, I should also say too, the CDBG-DR exhibits are all in Chapter 6 with the addition of financial management, which is 34-1A, I think.
You got it.
So those are the ones that we would typically be looking at. So you'll see that in the notification letter. If we're looking at infrastructure, you'll see the in the notification, we will tell you we're going to use exhibit. I can't remember all of the numbers, but if you go in there, you'll find them very easily. So you use the exhibits to audit your files in advance. Make sure that you have everything that you need available. And again, like I said, these are just a tool that we use. We may ask more questions than what are in there, but these will be used as far as when we come out to do the monitoring. So this is a screenshot of kind of what one of the exhibits looks like. And I wanted to make sure to bring up in these questions. So when we go through the exhibits, we answer every question, whether it's yes, no, or NA. And sometimes it is NA, and that's fine. Sometimes the questions are not part of the scope of the review that we're looking at. You'll notice in these exhibits, as you go through, they go through a lot of the policy and procedures. That's going to be something I think that we talk about in the common findings as well. We look at your policy and procedures. We make sure that you have controls in place to make sure you're being good stewards of public funds. And each of these, or not each of them, but most of them have a note that can give a little bit of more context on what we're looking at with that specific question. And almost always they have a reference, and you can see that very top one, to the Federal Register notice or to the 24 CFR 570, whatever regulation that question sort of comes from. You can see the reason that we're asking it from the actual monitoring exhibit itself. So enough about exhibits. How can I prepare? Well, we already said use the exhibits to run your files through. Make sure that you have everything documented. I know Marcella mentioned that earlier, and we will probably say that again as we go through. Document everything. Make sure your files tell that story so that we can see that what you've done followed all of your policy and procedures, as well as the Federal Register notices and regulatory requirements for the program. One thing that I've actually kind of noticed as we've done a lot more hybrid monitorings in the environment that we're in, as you're preparing for a visit, make sure that little things like the technical things work. You know, if you have a room that you need to have, actually we've got folks that are listening online right now, so make sure that all of that stuff is working in advance. I know, especially for our financial analysts, there's a lot of grantees have very different systems that keep all of your financial records. Make sure that those folks have access to all of those systems in advance. Typically, we're going to give you a list of documentation that we need to see. Try to have all of that ready in advance as much as possible. I know you're doing a million things, and when we come to visit, that probably puts a lot more burden on you. Yes, of course. So, but we appreciate everything that you can take care of in advance. And then one last thing is, and I know I mentioned hybrid meetings. I know a lot of folks, and we are the same way, are not in the office every day anymore. I think we go, a lot of us once a week. So if you know that we're going to look at the infrastructure program, and that program manager maybe only comes into the office on Wednesday, try to let us know, advance. So we're going to be setting up meetings and different things like that with you. So again, this kind of goes over a lot of things we've already sort of talked about. Get organized, create checklists, walk through the files. Again, we always say that, and we're giving you those, all of the questions to the test. So make sure you run your policy manuals through those exhibits as well. There's a written agreements exhibit that you can look through for your subrecipients. Check your systems and create that roadmap. Make sure that everything is working and ready to go before we show up. And so now I think we're moving on to some common findings. So what do we actually see when we look at these things?
Well, it's me again. So thank you, Chad. And just something that I will just finish with what he just said, as far as the review. You have files, and the files are telling us a story. Those are the ones that we hope, we pray that we go into your office, and when we get this either paper file or either an electronic file, that when we go into it, we were able to get those answers to the questions. So you've done the job, you have done your self-assessment. So you go through the questions. And I've seen great practices, and I do have grantees that they actually go through the exercise. They actually have presentations on the exhibits themselves. So it's the exercise of really getting yourself really like kind of adjust to the process. And the preparation shouldn't be as difficult if you're doing this every day. If you're keeping records of your items every day and it's going into your files every time that you do something, by the time that we say we're coming, it should be like, oh, we got it all. We just want to make sure that we have a checklist, that your file has a checklist on top. This is what you have in the files. This is what you're looking at. So those are like little things that you might think, oh my God, they're coming, there's a lot to do. Well, if you already have done the, the job on the daily basis, you probably not feel that we're coming. You'll be like, oh no, I got you. I got this, everything going. So the next part that we're going to go is like, what have we seen on the field? What have we actually crossed our path with while reviewing and checking files and making sure that everything is according to the, the requirements. So what are the most common findings? We had a great person in our team that took the time, and we have a team as well that went through all these different common findings, put it together, and we get to see it, and we work as a team, say, hey, this is what we do, how can we address it, how can we work together to help the grantee to get through it. So these are the most common findings. But before I get there, of course, and I will say, most of you know that we're gonna have a different we'll identify concerns and findings. If you're brand new, so this is new to you, what is a concern? What is a finding? Concern is like, it's like a warning. This is not, you have not violated any statutes or any requirements within the Federal Register or 24 CFR Part 570 or 2 CFR Part 200. You have time to fix it. We'll let you know these are concerns. Just don't get there. Otherwise, if you do it again, you might fall into the finding situation. What is a finding? A finding is actually that we find and in your programs that are like really violating those requirements. It is actually something that the requirement says, this is what happened and you didn't do it. So that's what the difference between concerns and findings. And just please, findings or concerns are not a bad thing. We always look at it as like, this is horrible. This is to always help us to get better and improve your programs. I said it from the beginning, there's no perfection. It would never get there. I don't think there's always something new. There's always something different with the disaster recovery. We're being like really moving around, transition after transition. So it's always going to be there. So do not get overwhelmed. Don't feel like, you're alone in these situations. It's like all the grantees, we all are in the same page too. So when working with HUD, you're just not working like, we're not there to get you. We don't play that game. We're here to help you. And we can sit down in a room, say, you know what, this is not looking good, but it's okay because we're here to provide that technical assistance, that support that you need. So we're partners. We're not here just to get you and then have that played of a detective role, just as a being just mean and they're coming. So please take that label. And I really ask you from the heart that we just I do have the passion for this. We all have the passion for what we do on a daily basis. We have a great team that has the passion for it. So we're really here to help you. And that's why we're also here together to get that, really make it happen for all of us. Because at the end, once again, is a community that is really suffering. And we're trying to get them to really get in the right place. So of course, we're going to use a lot of acronyms, right? Left and right. So I guess we just want to all get familiar with those acronyms and get what are the terms, what is and the requirements, what are we talking about? What is a duplication of benefits? What is a DOB? You know, those little things that you're like, okay, I need to get, familiar with that. Of course, we're going to ask you for documentation. Yes, we're going to ask you at the front end with the notification letter. We're going to ask you in the middle of it, and we're going to ask you while we're in there, and perhaps after the fact. So just be prepared to provide that information and have it available. And if you don't, we'll give you the time. It's okay. Once again, we're just learning as we move forward in the process. I already said it, so I don't think it's such. Don't take it personal. None of this is because your name, XY, you did this. No, this is a whole team effort. So don't take it personal. This is just part of the process to help you to improve your programs. So after we actually finish the review, we're going to issue a report. There's usually an exit conference that we're gonna sit together and say, hey, these are kind of potential issues we have seen or concerns or findings. You're not gonna be surprised. There's no like surprise, here are like 20 findings. Or one finding or none at all, right? But we'll let you know in advance. It's not going to be like such a shocking surprise for you. And sometimes, if there's like opportunities to talk through it, then we'll talk through it. But you have the main picture before we leave. Then when we issue that report in 90 days, and once it's issued, you have 30 days to reply with don't agree, or here's the evidence so we can close the finding. So there's also a process for you to talk through it. So once again, there's no like, oh, we're done, close this, and we just talk through it. You have the opportunity. I do have grantees. They do send me letters and say, I don't agree. And that is okay. Because we know we make mistakes too. We probably miss one item or we did not. So once again, we are human beings and we're just trying to make it, the best way possible. So we're just gonna let you know. And then of course, if you have concerns, we're gonna give you recommended actions. Once again, you don't have to reply on that, but you guys can take upon, and we're gonna really when we go back again and we look at those concerns, we're hoping that you fix it, and then that is not gonna be now an actual finding. And if you have findings, then we're gonna have into the actual corrective actions, like you must complete these items. And we hate the must word, but when we have to, we just have to do it because you have to do it. And of course, those reports are like the part of the, help me out here. I know I got this. Freedom of Information Act. So the reports that we're going to send it to you. We're not going to send it to anybody else. It's go straight to the recipient, and you would figure out how to distribute it among whomever parties you want to. But of course, it's followable, and then anybody can request it from the actual from the community, from the public. Alrighty, so we talked the main requirements, and Scott said, eligible activities. We have tie back, national objectives, and they're telling me we have 10 minutes, so we need to hurry up. This could go on and on and on, and we like to talk. So this one right here is the national objective. We have to make sure that you guys have really you meeting the numbers, and this is one of the most common findings. You either went into the census and you found an area Y, and then it was by mistake. It happens, and that's okay. Perhaps you got the wrong income limits by accident as well. Things happen in that direction, but just keep that in mind. You always have to meet the eligible activities, the national objective, and the tie back. Those are the three main areas that we're going to be looking at. So this is one of the most common issues that we have really seen across the board. So please keep that in mind. Duplication of benefits. Yes, make sure that you have a process. This is where we actually have issues with your policies and procedures are not really clear. You don't have an actual calculation. There's no verification process. There's always, and yes, duplication of benefits is tricky, but the actual calculation process is not as difficult as it seems like it. As you go through it, then you find yourself that it's doable and it's something that can be just really verified. We give you FEMA, SBA, just making sure that you have it verified, all the assistance. And so I'm finishing right here, tie back. That's another of the most common findings right here. And also, or either mitigation activities. We have some special mitigation grantees. Now, of course, it has embedded into the actual DR programs, but we want to make sure that you understand the tie back is, you are really providing the services of the persons that really suffer through the disaster. So we make sure that it's tied back to the disaster. But if you have mitigation activities, you have to make sure that you are meeting the definition of mitigation. So please think through it when you're going back to, your back home and say, hey, are we really doing this? These are the most common issues when then we don't want to actually end up there. So I am finished. I'm trying to get through my 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcella. So moving on to a couple of other common findings, and one thing I wanted to bring up. Oh, this is mine. So in just about all of these slides on common findings, you're going to see that last bullet. Grantee has systems issue policy and procedure gaps. So basically, if you get nothing else from this, make sure you have adequate policies and procedures, and make sure that your activity files show that you followed those procedures. So which goes perfectly into record keeping. We're looking to make sure that your activities files show that you met that national disaster, or met the national objective. Sorry. So that's another common one is record keeping. Make sure that you have everything that you're supposed to have on file. Website requirements. This one's pretty straightforward. Look in your Federal Register notice. You remember in your financial certifications, you gave us, your policy for how you're going to keep up with your website. You told us all the things that you were going to have on there. Make sure that you have all of those things on your website. That's another thing that we're going to look at when we come out to monitor. One common thing that I feel like comes up sometimes, a different part of your agency or office does some task, like say procurement, for example, and those things may not always show up right on your disaster recovery website. They may be on that other part of your agency's website. So make sure it's linked. Make sure that the public can easily find and see everything that you're doing with the funds. Inadequate subrecipient monitoring. So, we've done a lot of talk about risk analysis and monitoring. So again, make sure that you've done your risk analysis and make sure that you followed what that risk analysis told you to do as far as how often to monitor. Make sure you have documentation where you're tracking all of your findings. Like Marcella said, we're tracking all of the common findings that we see and trying to put those forward to you all and to help you out as you go through with your programs. Do the same with your subrecipients, your contractors, and everyone that you're working with and monitoring. And actually, another thing I wanted to bring up with that one, with subrecipient monitoring, so a lot of these questions are going to come up in the overall management exhibit. So I think we ask if you've been doing monitoring. So you should, keep a record of even not just monitoring, but TA visits, so you can show how you've been helping your subrecipients correct those different findings that you've come up with. Reporting requirements. This one's also pretty straightforward. Did you get your QPRs in on time? One thing I would mention here, be nice to your HUD rep. Think about timing when you're submitting your action plan right before the QPRs due, as I think probably everybody knows. When the action plan is in, I think it's submitted status, that means you aren't able to actually put your QPR in. So when, I don't know, say your HUD rep is at the grantee clinic, it's a little tougher to get that action plan review done so that you can get your QPR in on time. And back to risk analysis again. Sorry that hopefully that thread follows through the whole presentation. That's one of the things that we look at in those risk factors, is whether or not the reports were in on time. And then my last one is procurement. So procurement can have a very wide range of findings, obviously, and they can result in you having to redo procurement, or unfortunately pay back some of the funds if the procurement was done incorrectly. So obviously a big one. And again, this is something that you certified in your financial certifications, that you had adequate policies, and we've looked at them. So guess what I'm going to say? Make sure you followed your policies and make sure that you've documented everything that you did. So just a couple of examples of procurement findings. They can really range from very simple things like you didn't have the required clauses in a contract, to you didn't follow your policy for obtaining a best and final offer from a vendor after you've done an RFP. So some, like I said, a very wide range when it comes to procurement. And I think Chad's up next. Yeah.
Thanks, Scott. I know we're seeing 24 CFR 570 on these slides. We all know those are HUD regulations, right? But I think we need to say 2 CFR 200 is relevant too. If you're just joining us and less familiar, it's a OMB policy and guidance you'll see built into HUD's publications, checklists, and they're Title II grants, right? So if you're newer to the space, 2 CFR 200 does apply. I'm going to talk for the next couple of slides about their relevancy and common findings. So we're starting with insufficient internal controls, separation of duties, and capacity. This is low-hanging fruit. If we're looking at your policies and procedures, right, have an organizational chart. Have it for your overall agency, have it for your DR fully funded staff, highlight your partially allocated part-timers who are only dedicating maybe 20 or 30 hours to the program. Maybe you have a financial comptroller who's doing 20 hours a week. Highlight that in the org chart or pull it out and create a separate one. Show those separation of duties. Quick example, you wouldn't necessarily have a creator and approver within DR-GR to draw against HUD's line of credit, right? You have to have separation of duties. So you have one creator who perhaps is the grant manager, and the approver, maybe they're the senior comptroller in the next building working in finance that you're paying the 20 hours a week to review and ensure payments are ready to go to expend your DR funds. So just make sure those separations of duties are really clear. That's an easy one. If you want to break from policies and procedures, I used to like to make charts. It's an opportunity to use some graphics. Failure to meet cost principles, ineligible costs. We spend a lot of time discussing this. It's really important to have internal procedures to review invoices and documentation for eligible costs. It's not just on your accountants, right? Program staff, grant management staff need to have protocol in place, put together a couple one-pagers on prohibited costs, what can be covered, cost types. We talked about administrative costs, planning costs, activity delivery costs this week. Have that mapped out. Another opportunity to create some art in your policies and procedures. Know your cost types. Program staff should be knowledgeable on that, and they should be coordinating with finance staff who can spend more time doing their accounting procedures, ensuring that they're following suit with what they need to do to make payments. It's a team effort. Time, staff time. We've talked about this quite a bit this week too. Timesheets and activity logs, really critical. Okay, look, HUD is not as bad as if you ever managed a Medicaid or Medicare funded federal funding program. Every 15 minutes has to be accounted for. A sentence in every timesheet for every 15 minutes. HUD is not that bad, but we are asking you to do your due diligence and ensure that you are recording time. You know what you're doing, you know what your staff are doing, and you're noting it, right? And it's the same expectation for your subrecipients. You want those timesheets and those activity logs to be true to the deliverables to disaster recovery and for the funds that support that. Single audit, here we find single audit again. Policies and procedures around single audit. It could be simple, right? You could be a grantee and maybe you only have the obligation for your agency to ensure that you're following subpar F under 2 CFR 200 for single audit. But the game changes a little bit. I've got some grantees in the room with hundreds of subrecipients. So they have to ensure that their tracking is on point for single audit too, to make sure those folks are submitting to the Federal Audit Clearinghouse. So making sure that's in the policies and procedures as well. Know your obligations for single audit. The elephant in the room, administrative costs. We all know you can't breach 5%, right? It's in the regulations. It's a big one. Your financial analyst will look in DRGR, will ensure that your projects, your budgets, your obligations, your administrative cost does not exceed that 5%. It's everywhere we look. It's in our exhibits. When we're on site and monitoring, we're looking to ensure that for each grant award, you're budgeted and obligated appropriately, and that your expenditures not only support that, but at no time that you breach that 5% in administrative cost, right? It's a critical piece. I think I'm turning it back over to my friend here for sanctions.
All right, I know we're getting a little close to time, and you guys probably don't want to dwell on sanctions very much anyways. Hopefully, hopefully we don't have a lot of these that come up, but as the slide shows, the sanctions, when there is a finding, can go from please don't do that again to repaying funds. So again, as we've kind of discussed as we've gone through the presentation, make sure that you have everything documented correctly in your activity files. Make sure they tell that story, and work with your HUD rep on making sure that everything in there is exactly what needs to be there. Use the monitoring exhibits. They're a tool that we use as well. And then a few key takeaways, and then we'll wrap it up. HUD are a resource for you to utilize. Ask us a lot of questions. Marcella talked about how this is a team effort. That's exactly the way we look at it. It's not a gotcha kind of thing, monitoring. We really want it to be a good process. I know it's hard. We, like I mentioned before, we disrupt a lot of things when we bring 10 people out to the site to start and rummage through all of your paperwork. And I know that is a big lift for a lot of folks. But we really are there as a team to help you get through the grant. And ultimately, what we all want to see is folks that were affected by the disaster get back into housing, right? I mean, that's what we're all here for, is to be good stewards of public funds. So again, review the exhibits. You have the copy of the test already. Learn from other grantees, and use this time. And I know there's been a lot of really great conversations and presentations that you've had a chance to listen to this week. So do we go to? I think we go to questions now. Oh, resources. Yeah, I know I mentioned in these links. Make sure you check all of them out. The monitoring handbook is in here. There's a lot of previous presentations that have been done. The toolkit, and I think this presentation will be uploaded and available to you as well.
All right, so the room's bigger today. So raise your hand if you have a question and I'll run it to that person. And then I can somebody else raise your hand afterwards so I can make my way over for the following question. Anybody?
There's one right there.
Okay. Oh.
I was hoping there were not going to be any questions.
It's going to be a hard one.
I
'cause
thought we
you
did-
said no hard.
Just kidding.
I'll try and keep it simple. My name is Pat Clark. I'm with the City of Philadelphia. And in your experience as reviewers, are there any best practices or examples that you can share that really have good record keeping systems for CDBG-DR? And the second part to this question is, we're a recipient of HUD funding already, but we're a first-time CDBG-DR recipient. So we have existing systems for record keeping. Is it HUD's preference to see a standalone CDBG-DR record keeping system, or can we use our existing systems already in place?
Do you want to go with that one? Hi. Uh, so every grantee is different. I'm going to start from the end of, we've seen in all cases, I'm not going to say what is better or not. I cannot say you have just rather have a loan, but the best practices is yes, you want to have it as standalone because DR has different, there's nuances to it, waivers, different things that you probably want to keep it in a separate system. Once again, it's not saying you have to do that way. It's the best practice across the, the nation. As far as best practices and really how to keep, the requirement itself, it says you just need to have an actual, record keeping system, right? We've seen everything. There are systems, software systems that you guys use. We just, most of the time we ask the grantees just tell the story. Either if you're going to keep one system or two systems, it is up to you grantees, but just make sure that you're telling us the story. We have to go in there and then I ask you for one file and it just happened that like the 20 questions, we have to use 20 files. Maybe you want to think through this again. Like maybe you just need to go through like a different system. You should be able to answer all the questions or most of the questions of an exhibit from out of one file. And of course, we review multiple files, but it's telling the story. So it's more like, I've seen great examples where like they actually have a checklist within, say, these are the files that you're going to find here. This is the application. This is the income limits. This is the eligibility. This is like, within, use your exhibits as the guidance for you to go through the actual like have a checklist and review your software. There's no preference. Yes, we want to make sure that you guys have it for your own sake, or how do you keep yourself those records, right? Not judgment, but if you have multiple systems, you need to make sure that they are really telling the story. If you're saying that you're going to keep your software, that's the only one, okay, make sure everything is in there. That's all we just across the, I don't know if you have anything else to say.
No, one thing that I would add, and I see Phyllis with her hand up too, is just as you're answering those questions, kind of make it obvious. I always tell grantees that make it very, in your checklist, make it very obvious that where these answers are that we should find them.
Yeah, and just the last thing I would add is be sure whatever record system you have, you own your records. Don't get hung up. We've seen grantees and we go back later and they're like, we had a contract with so-and-so for the record keeping and then they left and they took our data. And it's like, oh, dude, don't do that. So be sure you own the records and that you have the ability to access those later on, because you do still have to have your records available post closeout and things like that. So don't just think that when you're done, you toss them.
Now you have a time frame after you close out to keep the records, and that remind me, it's 5 years or 3 years. I keep forgetting that. But yeah, just make sure that when you, and just adding to that, what just Philly said is there's always going to be a turnover. There's always going to be like someone leaving, and then make sure that there is still some SOPs or something saying, here's the file. This is where you can find it. Because in many cases, things that we've seen as challenges is like, oh, so-and-so left. We have no idea what it is. You should know, and there should be some sort of a records and SOPs telling you where to find it.
And actually, sorry, I keep thinking of new things as we're talking, but another thing that I would bring up too is make sure when you have turnover, that you're training all of your new folks on exactly what you're doing, how you're keeping these records and on your systems. A lot of times, especially if it's a proprietary thing that only you are using, some folks may not know how to use that system. So yeah, make sure that's part of your policies as well.
Okay, I think we have time for 2 more questions because I think they're pretty straightforward. So starting with the first one is, when monitoring our subrecipients, can we use the CPD handbook to create our own monitoring?
Yes. I mean, there's no,
Please do.
like, please do. I mean, we have created, like, of course, CPD created exhibits, but we have a lot of resources and we did it for you. So use them, don't hesitate. It would be like, actually, we cannot question that. If we do, it's like, oh, we need to change something ourselves, right? But yes, please do. Please.
Yeah, we'll go back and add that to the takeaway slide. And then the last one, it says, is there a public repository of categorized HUD monitoring concerns and findings? And I just want to reiterate, like, the exhibits that y'all went through were based off of past findings that we've had. And that really is a best practice to go review everything that we walked through in this presentation to know what other grantees have made mistakes with and steps to avoid.
Agreed.
And I think we're ready to.
Yeah, those are the trending findings of the last few years. We kind of just came
Right.
together and it's based upon internal conversation and documents and monitoring reports to gather what's trending the last couple of years for common findings.
Yeah, so I think we're ready to move forward to the last few slides and close you guys out for this morning.
Do we have more slides? Oh,
Yeah.
we do have more slides. So
Of course.
Oh,
obviously
Yeah.
continue the conversation on HUVA. And if there's any questions for any of us, feel free to reach out. I know
Please text me
Well-
and Huba.
we'll monitor that. Although I don't know if anybody's going to catch up with Ethel at the top of the list. The leaderboard is still up there. So thank you guys very much. It's really nice that they opened up the room for us. I'd like to think it was because of us and not because of the content that this was opened up. So thank you very much. And here is a list of the upcoming sessions. So thanks, y'all.